thanks to the candidates and their staff for being here today, and to the Brookline Dems and Newton Dems for making this event possible. Before we introduce the candidates, I just wanted to say a few words about Rise Up. Rise Up is a local grassroots group that was founded in the wake of the 2016 election. Most of us have never been all that involved in politics or activism before, but after last November, we decided that we just couldn't sit back and watch anymore. We meet about once a month as a group to hear speakers talk about important issues, from healthcare reform to carbon pricing legislation to how to talk to your Trump-loving relatives over Thanksgiving. We also partner with national organizations, including Indivisible and Sister District, which is focused on flipping state legislatures around the country from red to blue. We host phone banks and postcard parties. Most of us really hate making phone calls, but they do get easier with time, especially when you see the results, as we saw after our efforts in Virginia in November. And we also wrote cards and made calls to support Doug Jones in his victory in Alabama. And there is much more of that to come in 2018. We also work on other pressing issues. We were working with the Hub Dialer on ACA repeal opposition. We tried to do the same with the tax bill. So all sorts of things that are demanding immediate attention get our attention. And we partner with other activist groups on events like this. If you want more info about Rise Up, please stop by the table on your way out. Rise Up, though, is not unique. What's happening here is happening in every state around the country. People who were never involved before are coming out of the woodwork, sickened by the hate-mongering, and determined to work for a more hopeful future. Many of those groups are our co-sponsors today, and many of you are active in them, but not all of you. For the rest of you who have been thinking about getting involved, but haven't taken the plunge yet, I want to close with two observations. First, it's not as scary or as time-consuming as it looks like from the outside. If you commit to doing one phone bank a month or one postcard writing party, it's really tough with wine and cheese, a month, you'll be part of this movement. You'll feel good about it, and you'll have fun in the process. The second thing is, there are so many of these groups. Rise Up is probably not right for everyone, but there are a lot of different groups with different profiles. Come to meetings. Try different organizations. There are so many amazing people doing so much amazing work. Find the one that works for you. It's felt good for all of us to be a part of this national movement of activists over the past year. For me, one of the most wonderful aspects of this journey has been the chance to spend time in person with warm, funny, and committed people who want a better future and are ready to work toward it. The work is not glamorous, but we have fun doing it. And one of the most tireless fighters and the dearest people that I've gotten to know over the past year is the person who's taken the lead in organizing this event. I'm going to turn things over to him to introduce our candidates. Leo Kennedy.
Thank you, Stacey. Well, welcome to our Democratic Gubernatorial Forum. My name is Leo Kennedy, and I'm a proud member of Rise Up. And I have a whole bunch of thank yous before we get going, so let me get through them. First, I'd like to thank all the candidates for accepting the invitation. Thank you for being here. I also very much like to thank the members of the audience for showing up today and for filling out your questions online. Can I get a show of hands? How many people here today are part of an Indivisible group? That's impressive. Give yourself a round of applause. That's great. Today's forum is sponsored by Rise Up Mass, and it's in partnership with the Brookline Democratic Town Committee and the Newton Democratic City Committee. And I want to thank Sean and Cindy and Sharon for agreeing to co-sponsor this event with us. also like to thank the many other individual groups that have agreed to co-sponsor this event as well. They include Mass Together We Can, Indivisible 4CD, Harvard Medicine Indivisible, Take Back Health, Sister District Project, Forward Mass, Progressive Democrats of Mass, Action Together, Metro West, and Brookline PACs. If I've left everyone off, I apologize. I particularly want to thank the many volunteers who helped pull this event together. This would never have happened without your hard work. I am grateful. I want to say that I'm also very thankful for the leaders of Rise Up Mass for creating a group that allows people like me and others to have an opportunity to organize these types of events. I'm really proud to have been included in this type of group. This idea originated in the Rise Up Healthcare group, and I'm part of that. And I want to give you a little history about how this idea came together, because I think it really is indicative of what the resistance movement is about. The folks at Rise Up decided that we were going to shift our focus to elections across the country. And when our healthcare team met for the first time after the announcement, we kind of looked at each other and decided how we were going to get involved. During that discussion, we realized that there wasn't a person in the room who could name all three of the candidates running for governor in Massachusetts. And this being the healthcare group, we decided that that was really unacceptable and that we were going to try to do something about that. And this is the result. And I think that's indicative of what the resistance movement is all about. It's just ordinary people who said, this is our responsibility, and take matters into our own hands, and we're going to do something about it. This afternoon, we're going to hear from the three Democratic gubernatorial candidates. The questions are your questions. They were submitted online. Our volunteers have reviewed all the submissions, and we've picked the questions that we think are of the most concern, and some just because we thought they were kind of funky. And we will try to get to as many of those questions as time will allow. We had so many that we just basically had to overlap them, and we're not going to mention people's names just to keep things moving. Our moderators this afternoon are Cindy Rowe, Chair of the Brookline Democratic Town Committee, and Sharon Stout, the co-chair of the Newton Democratic City Committee. Sharon is a resident of Newton for the last 15 years. She sits on a number of boards and is a trustee of the Newton Library. She's also been in the political world for the past 28 years. She is currently the co-chair of the Newton Democratic City Committee, as well as the deputy treasurer of the Mass Democratic State Party. Now, I do have a request of the people in the audience today. And my request is that you listen to the three candidates today and make your own decision about which candidate you believe best represents the future of Massachusetts. But most importantly, make it your personal responsibility to get involved in this election. None of these gentlemen will be successful if you're counting on the person sitting next to you to get involved. If we've learned anything from 2017 is that bad things happen when we wait for other people to lead. To paraphrase David Ortiz, this is our state. Many of us sitting in this room assisted in turning Alabama and Virginia blue. So let's make it our mission to turn Massachusetts blue too. After the primaries, one of these gentlemen will be our Democratic gubernatorial candidate. Regardless of whom you decide to support during the primaries, let's be prepared to support the primary winner. Okay, so let's get started. The speaking order was decided a few minutes ago by drawing straws, and I will now turn it over to our moderator. Thank you again for coming.
Hello. Thank you so much for all these people coming out in the freezing weather. It's very impressive. So we're going to do our best by you. The first question is going to go in order to Bob Massey, then Jay Gonzalez, and then say one, so you guys will know. Okay? It's a healthcare question. All of you have stated your support of single-payer healthcare. What steps would you personally take to make single payer a reality in Massachusetts? And is it your goal to have single payer enacted during your first term? Bob Massey.
Oh, okay.
We thought we were going to have 5-minute opening statements.
Yeah, you were going to.
So that's going to be the first question after we do the opening statement.
Okay.
So Bob Massey is going to give his first opening statement. 4 minutes.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. It actually feels a little bit like coming home because when I moved to Massachusetts 34 years ago, the first place that I lived was in Brookline on Coolidge Street, not very far away. Why am I running? What would I do? I think those are the questions at the top of your mind. I'm running because I think the problems that we have in this state can be boiled down, in most cases, to one core issue, which is that our economy is fundamentally upside down. We have communities where money is leaving and floating upward to Wall Street, where it gets gambled away. And as a result, our dreams, the American dream, is fading for many people around the state. Now, I take great confidence from the words of Franklin Roosevelt in 1944, while we were still at war, and he laid out his vision for the future of the United States after the war had concluded. And he said that having come a long way with our political Bill of Rights, we now needed to recognize that Americans, in order to be free, have an economic Bill of Rights. And he said that to be free, to exercise life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we needed at least 4 things: a good home, a good school, a good doctor, and a good job. And if you think about those things, every single one of them is becoming harder to afford and harder to gain. And we have a governor who simply does not seem to recognize this, does not recognize the frustration, the grief, the anger that people feel because they grew up with a promise that they could move forward and that their children could move forward, and that's fading away. So I am running because I want to fight for all the people who are losing hope at this point. That includes working people who've been pushed from their full-time jobs into part-time jobs. Young people have been pushed into the gig economy. Women who continue to be denied gender equity. People of color who have faced decades and decades of institutional racism. And pretty much everybody who right now is finding it harder to move ahead. We have one portion of the population that's doing relatively well, and others, and many, many others who are struggling. So in this debate, in this forum, we're going to have a chance to talk about all of those things. Good home, good school, good doctor, good job, and transportation and energy. But I just want to say, I have a lot of ideas about how to provide more affordable housing. I have a deep commitment to public education and an opposition to charter schools. Before I ran for governor, I was head of a program at UMass Boston. I support single payer, and some of you know that I have some very strong personal reasons in my own background why I'm so committed to that. And on the job question, we have so many wonderful tools that we could be applying to increase our economic base, strengthen our communities, strengthen families. We need to move away from a system that is only concerned about shareholders and hedge funds. We need to make sure it's concerned about workers and citizens, and that's something that we really can do. One of the ways that we're going to talk about today is through moving rapidly to 100% renewable energy, so that instead of spending $20 billion a year buying fossil fuel to bring it here, we can create the greatest economic history in the the greatest economic opportunity in the history of the United States. And I just want to wrap up by saying, for me, the core of this issue is summed up in the words that we have often recited in the Pledge of Allegiance. I believe in liberty and justice for all. And I think in this campaign, at this moment in history, that is something that is right on the edge. So I believe, having said those words so many times, we now need to work to make sure that they come true. Thank you.
Hello, friends. It is great to be here in Brookline with so many people committed to that core American value that I think defines the Democratic Party. And that is our commitment to progress. My entire life, I've been fortunate, I've been surrounded by people who've proven our potential for progress. I worked for John Glenn, an American hero who literally reached for the stars and got there. I served as a cabinet secretary for Governor Deval Patrick, and you all know his life story. It proves the American dream exists, and he never lost sight of all those continuing to reach for it. And there are many others in my life who've proven this point about our potential for progress. People like my wife Cindy, who's here, my daughters, many of you who I've had the opportunity to work with, but no one more than my parents. My mom is from Cleveland, Ohio, and during college she went away on a foreign exchange program to Spain. 9 months later, she came back married to my 19-year-old Spanish father and pregnant with me. And I love telling that story to parents who have kids going on foreign exchange programs. But it all worked out. They didn't have a lot. My mom had to drop out of college to take care of me. My dad didn't speak English, and he'd never been to college. But he worked his way from laying bricks in a city sewer system to becoming a successful small businessman and a proud American citizen. My mom went back to college when I was in high school and became a public school teacher and a member of the teachers union. Together they put all 3 sons through college, and this year, against all odds, they will be celebrating their 48th wedding anniversary. So through that example, and just through the way they parented us, they always encouraged us to set high expectations for ourselves. And they instilled in us a belief that with hard work and a little help, reaching those expectations was actually possible. Now, those values aren't unique to me and my family. They're our values, American values, and no one has reached higher, worked harder, and accomplished more together than the incredible people of Massachusetts. Think about it. We started the Revolutionary War. We were the first to establish a public school and a public park, the first to recognize one's right to marry whoever you love, the first to make universal health insurance coverage a reality, and the list goes on and on and on. This is who we are. We have always been a leader, but we are not leading right now. Not under Governor Baker. I've been frustrated by how little our governor's accomplished, but I've been more frustrated by how little he has even tried. It is not good enough to simply accept the world the way it exists and try to manage it better. We need a governor who's going to see the way the world should be and take us to that place. Let's aim high. Let's aim high. Let's be us. Let's give working families across this state a better deal, an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. How about a living wage, paid family leave, affordable housing, and higher education, and child care? How about this crazy idea, a transportation system that people can actually depend on to get to work on time, right? Let's aim high when it comes to our dysfunctional healthcare system and implement a single-payer system that's simpler, cheaper, and does a better job keeping people healthy. Let's aim high when it comes to other big challenges we face, like climate change, the biggest threat to our planet, and our broken criminal justice system, which is jailing way too many for way too long. And more important than any of that, let's aim high when it comes to how we treat people. We need a governor who sees the value and potential of every single person. And I want you to know, if I'm your governor, it won't matter what color you are, what your sexual orientation is, what you believe, whether you are from Brookline or from Newton, whether you just came to this country, whether you have a disability, whether you're a Syrian refugee. I see you, I believe in you, and as your governor, I will work for you. We have always done better when we see our differences as strengths, and when we recognize that beneath those differences are many more similarities, when we treat each other with respect and dignity and love. So let's do it. Let's aim high. If we do, I know we can build a better future for everybody. That's the lesson my parents taught me. It's the American story. It's what the people of Massachusetts have proven over and over again, and it's what we should expect from our government and from ourselves. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? It is great to be here. I apologize up front for the Newton guy. I'm going to have to say some nice things about Newton this afternoon, okay? All you Brookline people. Look, I want to thank the organizers today. The worst thing Donald Trump has done is turn neighbors into enemies. And you all not only have put forth the resist movement in a way that is unmatched around the country, you've also organized around policies and principles by promoting paid family leave, $15 minimum wage, and the Fair Share Tax Amendment. So thank you very much for all that you're doing. Look, there are three things that drove me into this race for governor. One is my service in the military. I enlisted in the military a little bit after 9/11. I'm a third-generation combat veteran. My year abroad, when I was deployed to Iraq, an Iraq War veteran, I worked with people that had, in certain circumstances, nothing in common with me. People of different races, religions, backgrounds. We couldn't afford not to work together. The second is my 8 years serving the people of Newton, working for the 88,000 people of my hometown every single day. When I ran for mayor in 2009, Newton had a $40 million structural deficit, 2 of the worst conditioned school buildings in the state, no rainy day fund or reserves, 1 AAA bond rating that was in danger of being downgraded. In the 8 years since I've been mayor, we've eliminated the $40 million structural deficit. We're building 5 new schools in the next 6 years, 3 of which are done. The next is being constructed now. We have 2 AAA bond ratings for the city of Newton. We're rebuilding our roads, sidewalks, our fire stations, and reinstating public safety officials that we lost before I became mayor. The third is my family. I'm a father, I'm a husband with children, 9 and 6, and I know where I came from. Both of my parents came from tough neighborhoods in New York. My dad grew up in a neighborhood that was deemed the worst block in America by CBS News at the time because of the drugs, gangs, and violence. He got out of that life by joining the military. Went to Korea, came home, met my mom. They went down south to college. Sat at lunch counters and movie theaters to desegregate the South. And my dad found Newton, Mass. Because he was looking for higher ed. And he purchased the home where I grew up with my 2 sisters and where I live today, with my wife and 2 children with GI Bill benefits. GI Bill benefits. This is a government-sponsored program, an investment for people with modest means so they can make ends meet and ensure their kids can do better than they did. That is not happening in the Commonwealth today, and it is wrong. That's why I believe the defining issue of our time is economic inequality. And to address it, I put forth 2 policies when I announced for governor, among many. One is putting in place a single-payer healthcare system in our state right now, so that our people, can access affordable healthcare. The second is putting in place free public college, lifelong, with paid apprenticeships and internships, so people can attain the credentials they need to work in this economy and make ends meet in this economy. Before I end, I want to mention, we are going to talk a lot about policy this afternoon, but I want to mention a story. I was in UMass Amherst, UMass Lowell recently, and a student stood up and he asked me after a session, what is the biggest issue in front of you in this gubernatorial campaign? And I said there are 2. One is accepting the status quo, and the second is the fact that people thinking they can't do anything about it. We are going to do something about it this year. We're going to defeat Charlie Baker, and we're going to make sure that everyone has a shot in this Commonwealth, just like previous generations. Thank you very much.
Okay, so those were the opening statements, but now we get to ask the questions that were generated from the responses that you in the audience gave to the question, what would you ask the gubernatorial candidates if you had the opportunity? So starting off, the first question that we are going to pose is, can you describe 2 concrete steps you would take to move toward racial equity in this state? And we want to vary the order of responses, so we are going first with Jay Gonzalez, then Seti Warren, and then Bob Massey.
So racial disparities is a huge problem. It's been persistent.
If you read the recent Globe Spotlight series, it did a really incredible and compelling job of shining a light on just how persistent these disparities are and how troubling they are, racial disparities. First of all, we need a governor who actually acknowledges them and makes it a priority to do something about them. I am running for governor. My agenda primarily is about trying to address inequities in general. So things like making housing more affordable, addressing those issues that affect people on a day-to-day basis and are holding them back, making access to child care affordable for everybody in this state, a great education system, access to a great single-payer healthcare system so there's actually equity and access to the healthcare services people need. All these different issues that will help many people across the state who've been struggling, but will disproportionately help those constituencies and populations, like the black population in Massachusetts, that has been severely impacted by these disparities. Having said that, it is clear that we need to do more with respect to racial disparities in this state. We have been tolerating for way too long that which is intolerable. And I think to the question about two concrete things, one thing that I would do as governor is use the power of the state as an actor to help lift those communities up. So when I worked for Governor Patrick, we actually created the Office of Access and Opportunity, whose mission was about this very issue. And we increased the amount of business that state government did with minority-owned businesses. We did things like invest in training programs for minority-owned businesses to help them better compete for state business. We did things like fund programs to provide access to capital for minority-owned businesses to help lift those businesses up, which disproportionately employ blacks and other minorities. So that's one thing. The other thing is this point about the governor having the power of the bully pulpit and having the ability to prioritize and shine a light on issues and twist the arms of leaders throughout this state to make this a priority and do something about it. And as governor, you would have my commitment that employers across this state, leaders and institutions across this state would have it on their agenda at my request and demand to look inward at what they're doing and what they can do differently to make a difference to address these racial disparities that we need to deal with.
Thank you for that question. When I think about that question, I think about my own family. When my grandfather came home from World War II, he's a veteran of the Battle of the Bulge, he came home and was not able to take advantage of the suburban housing that a lot of the white GIs did. He worked hard. My dad came home from Korea, was a part of the civil rights movement, went to jail, sitting at lunch counters and movie theaters. We have made a tremendous amount of progress in our country, certainly here in our state, but we know that this Globe Spotlight series highlighted the fact we have a long way to go. So look, there are a few different ways we can attack this. The first thing I would say to you, my commitment to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, if I'm elected your governor, is number one, making sure I have continual conversations and listen, which I have been doing with communities of color now. I'm going to be putting forth real proposals and metrics behind them that are transparent, and as your governor, you need to hold me and the legislature accountable to those metrics. That is a commitment I'm making to you now. Now look, we know one of the places is access to this booming economy in and around the greater Boston area, the innovation economy, the healthcare economy. We need to make sure we do that through apprenticeships and internships and co-ops. One of the things that I did as mayor is created a high school internship program for kids in my community that are underserved. You know, in Newton, we have 1 in 4 of our residents are born outside the United States. We have the second highest number of millionaires in the city of Newton. At the same time, 1 in 8 of my residents live out of below the poverty level. So I made sure that we I created a high school internship program. We started with 4 interns. We ended up with 95 last year, working in businesses in the innovation economy, Mass Challenge. We also had them, they were paid, and they had a curriculum behind it. We need to scale up programs like that, and I also would include housing and transportation. We are under-resourced in our state, and transportation is a driver of economic inequality in our state. We see what's gone on with the Fairmont line and other lines. They have not been invested in, particularly in areas of communities of color. We need to expand those, and we also need to add housing opportunities for people connected statewide. So those are 2 areas I believe could make a real difference in the racial disparity question.
The first thing I'd like to say is that I have been committed to economic justice, racial justice, gender justice for my entire adult life. This has a root in my own experience of exclusion because of a disability in my childhood, and that's made me deeply committed to and interested in the challenges that so many communities, and particularly communities of color, face. Now, one of the complicated things about this is that these problems, many problems, are interrelated, and that's why it's helpful now that we have the concept of intersectionality, so that we understand one thing influences another. The problems of wealth in this state are twofold. One are around wages, which is why I support the increase of the minimum wage to $15, but that's over the next 4 years, and it still is going to leave people with not enough money to make ends meet. And that's a particular problem for communities of color, who in addition to facing the normal economic difficulties, face extra difficulties in not being granted opportunities. One of the things about the Globe article that was particularly shocking was the way in which it talked about the Seaport District, which where we spent nearly $20 billion totally, and so little of it made a difference for the communities that lived right around there. The other thing is wealth, not just wages, but wealth. And one of the core problems for communities of color is that they have been denied the opportunity over and over again for the entire history of our republic to own things, to own homes. It's been difficult to find homes, to own businesses. So building opportunities for ownership, building wealth. In Boston, the average white family has $250,000 worth of equity versus an average of 0. So specifically, there are many things that we can do. First, to boost the economy, boost wages, boost wealth, and then we need to, such as we can change models, invest in infrastructure, we can move forward on clean energy. These are all things that will help all of us. But then we also need to give special attention to those communities that have long been denied. And at UMass Boston, I created a program on climate justice, which looked at how the spending we're going to have to do to protect ourselves against climate change could also benefit other communities, particularly Roxbury, East Boston, Mattapan, and the other communities there. So there are many pathways, but we have to remember that these things are closely linked. And the good news is that by solving one problem, we have the opportunity to solve others. Thank you.
The next topic is going to be 4 minutes for the answer. It's going to be under taxes and economy. The new GOP tax bill eliminated key deductions that may make it less likely that Massachusetts can realize democratic priorities that rely on local taxes. How do you propose to finance investments in education, child care, health coverage, and infrastructures if voters refuse ballot questions that would raise taxes? The first person is Seti Warren, then Jay, then Bob Massey.
4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Thanks for that question. Look, as these policy changes come out of Washington, the first thing we need to do is have a governor that's going to stand up against them. Governor Baker's comments around this tax package was, some of it's pretty good. I was dead set against it. This is a giveaway for multinational corporations and extreme wealth. It does nothing to invest in the things that matter. What are the things that matter? I've gotten in this race because of economic inequality. We know we need to invest in our K-12 system. We are underfunding it right now. We also need to add to public education after-school enrichment, summer enrichment, and early childhood. These are real investments. We have the worst commuter rail system in the country. Federal data just came out. Governor Baker's answer is privatization and no new revenue. We have got to invest in our people and our infrastructure so that we give everyone an opportunity to be successful. We've got to pass the Fair Share Tax Amendment next year. This is extremely important. I'm a supporter of it. It goes towards education and transportation in our state. It's asking folks making $1 million a year or more to contribute a little bit more so that we can reinvest it in these generational areas and ensure that there's continued economic growth, but it also spreads to underserved communities in our state and people who are underserved as well. So what can we do? We can build budgets that drive outcomes for our people here in the state. We can be honest about the fact that we need to raise revenue and ask folks that are doing really well to pay a little bit more so we can level the playing field for everyone in the Commonwealth. And we can build budgeting that's honest and transparent, that is my first House month budget that I submit to the legislature. If I am your governor, will be honest. I will present something called a level service budget, which means you're going to see the amount of money it takes to fund what we're doing right now, and I'm also going to provide 5-year revenue projections, not just 1 year. This governor's gotten away with games and gimmicks that have created a downgrading in our bond rating this year by Standard & Poor's. So we have to be honest and transparent, we have to drive outcomes, and we also have to be honest about raising revenue in our state if we're going to not just resist Donald Trump, but make sure we give everyone an opportunity to be successful here in the Commonwealth.
So let's be clear about this. There's a very different approach that our current governor is taking to the job than the one that I certainly want to take, and I think even these two great gentlemen next to me want to take. The way he approaches the job is basically looks at where are we and what do we have and what's the best we can do, as opposed to where do we need to be and how do we get there. This question, how are we going to finance education, childcare, healthcare, these fundamental responsibilities of state government, in the event that the ballot question to impose an additional income tax surcharge on millionaires, if that doesn't pass, that's what I understood the question to be, is a really important question. And right now we've got a governor who hasn't even said whether he supports the income tax, the millionaire's tax passing, which, by the way, would generate meaningful new revenue we desperately need for education and transportation. $2 billion a year. Our total tax base right now is about $26 billion a year. It gives you a sense of scale. This is meaningful new revenue that would also help make our tax structure here in Massachusetts, which is very regressive, a little more progressive, by asking those who are doing great to pay a little bit more. So I support this wholeheartedly. I think this is what we all need to be advocating for, because I'll tell you, as I've been going around the state for almost a year now, talking to people all around this state, it has validated everything we already know about the fact we're underfunding education in this state, particularly in lower income districts and rural districts across the state. Child care isn't even on the governor's radar, child care and preschool, which is a huge priority of mine. After I left the Patrick administration, I served as chair of the State Board of Early Education and Care for a year, until Governor Baker graciously asked me to resign, which I graciously did. But I learned a lot about the issue when I was there. And I became convinced that the most important thing we can do, the biggest return on investment we can get for kids and families across the state, is to make access to affordable, high-quality child care and preschool available to everybody. And I've committed to do that by the end of my first term. The evidence is really clear on this. This is game-changing for young kids, particularly lower-income kids, in terms of their success in school and in life. And it allows their parents to go to work to support their families. In the state where child care is the most expensive in the country, about $15,000 a year for each kid, most families can't afford it. This is the most formative period of a person's life where 90% of brain development happens, and we do the least. My wife, Cindy, who's here, grew up in Chicopee, Massachusetts, to a very young, poor mother. she had access to federally funded Head Start childcare and preschool as a result. And that gave her the solid foundation she needed to be successful in school and in life. Every single child deserves that. It is the type of leadership we need, the type of investment we need to make collectively as a community through our instrument government that will be game-changing for kids and families across this state. It's not even on our governor's radar. He's not only not making progress on it, he's not even trying. If the fair share ballot question doesn't pass, I will propose another way, a progressive way, to generate the meaningful revenue we need to make that investment and others like it.
I want to answer this in two ways. First of all, I think we have to understand that the root of this problem is corporate power. Corporate power that has seized control of the federal government and of our Congress and is ramming through, without consultation, without hearings, these enormous, colossal, unthinkable, objectionable giveaways to corporations on the theory that if they get more money, they will give it back to us. Not likely. In fact, what companies do, I'm telling you right now, big corporations are sitting on the largest piles of cash in their history. And they are not increasing benefits, and they are not increasing wages. What they're doing is increasing the salaries of people at the top, buying back their own stock so that the stock price goes up, or buying their competitors so that there are fewer people and organizations competing in their industry. So we have to understand, this is a massive theft that should be opposed and is being opposed by governors and legislatures around the country. Now, what do we do here? First thing is that Jay gave a wonderful example, I think, that you don't start with the question of how much something costs. You start with what do we want to do? What benefits would it bring? And what would it cost us if we don't do something? Because standing still is often a pathway to destruction. So a governor needs to make the case that spending is about fulfilling our objectives and dreams and building the infrastructure. True for childcare, true for energy, true for infrastructure, true for so many things that this state could be making progress on. And then finally, I just want to say, all over the country right now, people are studying how to compensate for the loss of the tax deduction for state taxes. And they're thinking all different mechanisms. That is, transferring it to a payroll tax or many other things where we could gain back the revenue that's being stolen from us. But I think that this comes back to some of the core issues that Indivisible and other groups have raised, that Bernie Sanders raised. I'm the only person here who supported Bernie Sanders, which is that we need a revolution to take back from corporate power the right to decide our own future and the right to figure out how we want to spend our money on what is good for us. So that's what we need to do, is re-inspire democracy. And that's where you are actually more important than the three of us. If you demand it, it can happen. If you don't, we're going to be stuck with Charlie Baker, whose motto is to stall and to study and to stand still. And that is not the pathway to the future.
Now we are entering a segment where each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer the following questions. So, our next question is, what 2 specific actions will you take to promote affordable housing? And the order for this question is Bob Massey, Seti Warren, and Jay Gonzalez.
So again, the first thing we need to recognize is that when you rely on markets by themselves to build housing, they build housing for rich people. And the reason for that is you make more money building housing for rich people than you do for poor people. So the question is, what do we do about that fundamental market failure? Housing is a right. It is the first rung on the ladder to having a secure future and a secure daily life. Now, the important thing is that this question, how do we do this, is being answered all over the country through mechanisms. First of all, we need to increase the supply of affordable housing. A lot of that has to do with federal and other tax credits. The Trump administration almost ripped all of those out. They made it back in, and that's a good thing. But we also have alternative models of ownership. So we have cooperative housing, and we have co-housing, and we have accessory dwellings where people who live on a property want to build another structure on their property or want to use part of their property. My wife and I could not have afforded the home that we live in if after World War II, the people who owned that house had not turned their third floor into an independent apartment, which we rented to people at a lower rate than most folks because we understood that it was so difficult for people to get housing. So all of those things, new models of ownership, new models of finance, new ways for people to come together and build housing and invest in that, all of these things are available. I used to run something called the New Economy Coalition, which looked at sustainable economy, collaborative economy, sharing economy, all the different mechanisms, 200 groups that are working around the country on boosting the local economy, increasing the availability of capital, strengthening small business, and lowering the cost for families, which is, again, a core issue around energy. So we have to be doing, again, these all are connected. But the shocking thing is that this governor, I think, is so far away. He's been so rich and so tall for so long that he doesn't understand what really happens. And one of the virtues of the way we have to campaign, and that all of us have been through. I've been in 170 communities around Massachusetts, and I have seen not only what my colleagues and friends and neighbors in Somerville are going through, but what people are going through around the country and around the state. And I know that both SETI and Jay have done this. You must elect a Democrat, because one of us will tackle this problem in a way that Charlie is simply unwilling to do.
So I just want to say something about who voted for who in presidential elections. Look, we had a great field in 2016. The folks ran for president. We got a great field here. I am proud that I voted for Hillary Clinton. I worked for her directly at the White House. I know her personally. I know her integrity. I know her heart. And we would have been a lot better off if she had won that election. And I also will say this. I am also proud because when I looked into my daughter's eyes, who's 9 years old, I wanted that glass ceiling to be shattered more than anything else. So look, we're going to come together after this primary. We're going to work together. Fortunately, we came short in 2016. We will not come short in 2018. Look, on housing, I hear people all the time in my own town saying their kids can't afford to live in Newton or will not be able to live in Newton. I just went through relocating my mom. She lived in the Cape for 25 years in a single house, and I couldn't find, and I was lucky, couldn't find for months a place for her to live. She couldn't live alone anymore because it was so expensive. This is a real crisis in the state of Massachusetts. This governor has no strategy, no plan of investment to deal with it. So here's how I see it. Two things need to happen. Number one, we need to change our zoning laws. There's legislation up on Beacon Hill right now that would make it easier for mixed-use development, make it easier for accessory apartments, make it easier for multi-family homes. We need to get that passed, as well as requiring a percentage of affordable housing for developers, making that legal. We need to get that passed. The second thing we need to do is invest in subsidies. Governor Baker has cut subsidies for affordable housing in this market that we know is on fire for really wealthy people and luxury housing. So we need to have subsidies so we can build, we need to have regional strategies that are attached with transportation. I never talk about housing unless I incorporate transportation options that are accessible. Both need investment. Both would get done if I become your governor.
All right. Thank you. This next question is going to go in order of
I want to start by just saying, Bob, I can speak from experience, not everybody who's really tall is bad. So, affordable housing. First and foremost, we need leadership. We need a governor who's going to actually acknowledge that we face a huge crisis, not only in the greater Boston area, but on the Cape, in the Berkshires. There are a number of areas of our state where affordable housing is a real problem. We need leadership, basic leadership skills. We need to identify the scope of the problem. We need to identify what the solution is, what the end state, the goal is that we need to get to. We need a plan based on all the different tools at our disposal to get there, and we need to execute against it. None of that is happening right now under our government, not only in this area, but in any other. There are two traditional tools that we use to create affordable housing. One are subsidies. Right now, state government has about 56 different state entities, all of which have different little pots of money that work on affordable housing, mass housing partnership, community development corporations, local affordable housing trust funds, you name it. We need to coordinate all those different resources. Right now, they're all being used in isolation and not as effectively as they could be. We need to coordinate them and drive them toward a common plan that we're executing against to get the most out of it. The other thing is zoning. That's the other tool, or regulatory. When developers are developing new projects, we need to make sure they're setting aside enough of those units for affordable units for lower income people and workforce housing for middle income people who also are getting crowded out of the market. We need to take a fresh look at 40B, in my view. We've got to balance community interests and in specific communities against the need to develop more affordable housing in communities, but we need to develop more affordable housing in communities all around the greater Boston area as an example. Right now, Boston and Somerville and Cambridge are the only ones doing it. And this is a crisis, we need to treat it like a crisis. Lastly, we need creative solutions. Seti mentioned transportation. We all support high-speed rail, east-west rail from Springfield to Boston. That's one example. If we made it a commute from Springfield to Boston, it's not only a huge economic development benefit for Western Massachusetts, it's an affordable housing solution for the greater Boston area, where there are lots of job openings that people out there could help fill. So we need to think about this creatively. When I worked for Governor Patrick, I just want to put in a quick plug for people who are chronically homeless. We need to take this on with a sense of urgency too. When I worked for Governor Patrick, we developed a creative solution to provide private financing to help provide permanent supported housing, permanent housing for people who are homeless, which stabilized their lives and reduced their health care costs.
As we enter to the second half of this, we want to make sure we thank our Secretary of State, Bill Galvin, that just walked in the back. So thank you for joining us today. So the next question will be, what are your top 2 priorities to help Massachusetts cut carbon emission, and why are they the top 2? The order will be Jay, Bob Massey, and Seti Moore.
So, I guess my top 2 priorities at the highest level are to get to a true clean energy economy as quickly as possible. 2050 is the goal that most people are coalescing around. I support that goal. If we can do it faster, we should. The other thing is we should create thousands and thousands of jobs here in Massachusetts in the clean energy sector. And I want to talk a little bit more about both of those high-level goals. On reducing emissions and getting to a true clean energy economy, this is yet another example of an area where we've got absolutely no leadership from our governor, who is slow-walking our transition to a clean energy economy in the context that we see every day. Just last week, more examples right here in Massachusetts of the consequence of not doing anything on this. This is the biggest threat to our planet. We have to have leadership in this area. We need to work with a sense of urgency to take this on. I think we need to accelerate our transition to renewable energy sources. I think we need to oppose any expansion of natural gas pipeline infrastructure, which just furthers our dependence on fossil fuels. I think if we can't get our surrounding states to join us on this, we should be the first state in the nation to adopt carbon pricing, which all economists agree would be a really important tool to accelerating our transition to renewables. We've got a governor, this is an example, you've got to watch the difference between what he says and what he does. He got a lot of credit for criticizing Donald Trump for pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord agreement. Right here at home, he does not oppose expansion of natural gas pipeline infrastructure. He is slow walking the transition to renewables thanks to all the fossil fuel industry people he appointed to the Division of Public Utilities that's overseeing the development of offshore wind. We need leadership here. We need a governor that's going to make this a priority and have a sense of urgency around it. On creating jobs, this is also a huge opportunity for us. We are positioned to be the world's leader in the clean energy sector. Governor Patrick used to say we could make the world our customer in the clean energy sector. We've got all the academic institutions to drive these new technologies. We've got all the financial capacity and venture capital funding and everything else we need. When we were in the Patrick administration, we made forward-thinking investments like the pier in New Bedford that I helped fund, which provided a launching pad for offshore wind. So we could create thousands of jobs here if we have a governor who's intentional about it and makes it a priority.
So I was asked for 2 priorities. That's challenging because I have been working on climate change for more than 26 years. In fact, I'm the person who organized the first major event on climate change, major public event, at the Museum of Science for 300 people, to which Al Gore, who I've worked with closely, came in April of 1992. And I have to tell you that when I organized that and we heard more about the seriousness of the problem, I thought, oh my God, this is going to take 10 full years for America to wake up and act. That was 26 years ago. Now, I also was the head of something called CERES, which was a coalition of environmental activists and big pension funds that pushed major companies to move forward. And I started something called the Investor Network on Climate Risk back in 2002, which brings together the biggest pension funds in the United States, public pension funds. Last time it met, meets every 2 years at the United Nations. It brought people who control $22 trillion together to push for renewable energy. This has been a core focus. And to show just how passionate I am about this and how specifically I want to act, I put out just a few days ago this report, which we're going to circulate, which is 26 pages, and it's really just getting started on all the things we can do. It's called Our Common Future, Bold Leadership for Clean Renewable Energy. So what would I do? Let me give you 6 things. 1, we have to end utility control. The utility control of the system. In other words, we have the foxes in the chicken coop. Our Department of Public Utilities is led by people from the fossil fuel industry. We need to rearrange the incentives. Right now, people are being asked they're being rewarded for building more stuff. That's why they want to build pipelines. We need to end the restrictions on solar, but in fact, the DPU in the last 24 hours increased them. We now are the first state in the nation to have a mandatory charge for people who have solar on their homes. We need to stop pipelines. And yesterday I was with Francis Crowe out in Western Mass, who at the age of 98 was arrested for trying to block a pipeline. We do need what I like to call the transition dividend. So it's carbon pricing, but it focuses that we get money to make the change. And finally, we need to build new municipal, publicly owned utilities like Holyoke Gas and Electric that have been blocked by the major utilities since 1920. We need to create those, move forward, and move into world leadership. Right now, we are far behind, and we need to move forward immediately.
So when I think about the climate change challenge, I think about it connecting it to social justice and the social justice challenges we have here in the Commonwealth. The driving one being economic inequality. Look, one way we can deal with climate change is to promote offshore wind, which I believe in, promote solar, which I believe in. One of the things we were able to do in Newton was we used solar to cut our carbon footprint in half as a municipality. I'm proud of that. In the 8 years since I've been mayor, I'm going to save $40 million over the next 20 years because of the solar program that we used. We shared solar power from municipal property with 900 of our low-income residents to give them a credit on their energy bill, so it would lower their energy bill. This is a perfect example of how we can address climate change and also address social justice issues and economic inequality. Second, we all saw during this storm that there was flooding in Greater Boston, on the Cape. We also should be developing investment in climate change resilience technology and infrastructure. This is an opportunity to create jobs in addition to offshore wind and solar, particularly in underserved communities. We need to be getting ready for what is happening. We know climate change is real. Science is there, right, everyone? We saw the evidence of it, right? So let's make those investments. Lastly, I would use something called the Clean Energy Center. This is something that Governor Deval Patrick created. I would scale up the Clean Energy Center to make investments in renewable energy technologies, not just solar and wind, but these technologies and climate change resilience technologies, so that we can do what Deval Patrick did with Life Sciences Initiative. We are a world leader in life sciences because of Deval Patrick's leadership there. We should do the same thing in investing in renewables, renewable energy technology. We should be the national, and not just national, but worldwide leader. Now that President Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accords, other governors are getting this, including Jerry Brown out in California. With all due respect to Jerry Brown, Massachusetts should be the clean energy leader in the world, right? So, and that's how I would approach this issue. We should be scaling up the programs that I mentioned to reduce energy costs for people using renewables, and we should be using solar, wind, renewable energy technologies to create higher paying jobs for people who live, particularly in underserved communities across our state.
The next question is also a 3-minute question, and the order will be Senny Warren, Jay Gonzalez, and Bob Massey. What will you do to make certain that every child in Massachusetts receives a high-quality education, no matter where that child lives and regardless of that child's family's socioeconomic status?
I know there's some good things about education here in Massachusetts, but I also know there are some very serious challenges and divisions and inequity. The achievement gap is real. I've seen it in my own district with those who come from wealthier households that can afford early childhood, after school, summer, tutoring, and then higher education. This divide grows even further when you move out of the greater Boston area. What would I do? We need to redefine what we mean by public education here in the state of Massachusetts. The state of Massachusetts is not, at this moment, committed to educating every child in every district. We need to revamp this Chapter 70 funding. It does not reflect the needs of children coming into our classroom. We need to make sure we're paying our teachers the right wage, great teachers in the classroom. We need to make sure those classes are the appropriate size. And we need to make sure those buildings are adequate for children. We need to make sure, as I said, we add to public education, after-school enrichment, summer enrichment, and early childhood. On average, it costs $19,000 a year to send a child to early childhood in the state of Massachusetts. And that's if you can find a seat. So we've got to make all of these investments. And then at the higher ed level, as I said, we do need to put in place a system of free public college, just like high school, so that lifelong, so that people can go back and get additional credentials and education they need to make ends meet in this evolving, changing economy.
tell you what I wouldn't do, is make my entire education agenda around creating a few more charter schools for a few more kids. The most fundamental responsibility we have collectively through government is to provide a great public education to every single child, period. And Governor Baker's whole approach on this has been a total cop-out and exactly the wrong direction from the direction we need to go. There have been studies done, anecdotal evidence everywhere I go. We are not adequately funding our lower income district schools. We need to increase funding through Chapter 70 formula from the state to provide adequate funding. It's a constitutional responsibility here in Massachusetts. It's a moral responsibility here in Massachusetts. We need to do that. I also am concerned about the correlation between how kids do on MCAS, how school districts do on MCAS scores, and the income levels of the district. There is a very strong correlation, which says, and this isn't surprising, it's intuitive, that there's a lot of stuff going on outside the walls of the school that impact a child's ability to learn. Whether it's living in and around more violent areas, whether it's having a roof over your head, being hungry, we need to address these fundamental factors that kids are facing that make it harder for them to learn. Access to good quality child care and preschool, which I talked about before, so their starting point is at the right place. One of the things that I think we should do is really look at, particularly in the lower income districts, is look at putting social workers into the schools whose job it is to get to know the families, to get to know the child and the families from the very beginning, understand what the challenges are they're facing in their lives outside the walls of the school, and help provide a connection to services and benefits that might be available to them to help address those factors and help stabilize their lives. We can't ask teachers to solve all of these problems. The other thing I would say, my daughter is a senior at Brookline High School. She has been totally stressed out during her time in high school. Testing, the academic demands, it's very unlike the experience I had when I was in high school, and it was not healthy for her. I worried about her. It's a great school. She's going to be very well prepared. College is going to be easy for her. I'm sure of that. But it felt like too much, and that concerns me. And I think, one of the things we need to do is really take a fresh look at whether or not we're teaching our kids the right stuff to prepare them for the 21st century economy. And that's something I will do as governor.
I have been a teacher. I've been a professor. I personally have benefited enormously when several extraordinary colleges, elite colleges, gave me the scholarship and the money to be able to participate. I recognize that that is denied many people, and without a strong education, growing up as a child with a serious disability, I would not be here today. This is one reason why I support the Fair Share Amendment that will raise nearly $2 billion, about half of which will go to our school system. But we need to be thinking much more boldly. As Jay said, what is an education for the 21st century? I mean, I think we're headed in the wrong direction. In addition to universal pre-K, we need to be thinking about what and how are our children learning. At the very moment that we've been doubling down on high-stakes testing and forcing kids and teachers to teach to the test, we are seeing that to succeed in the global economy, you need to be tech savvy, you need to understand creativity, you need to be imaginative, you need to be collaborative. These are things that many other countries are now moving forward, and we are really not. Now, one reason I also feel very strongly about this is that my stepfather, Seymour Papert, was a founder of the Media Lab at MIT, where he spent an enormous amount of his career focusing not on computers being flashcards, but being an instrument of creativity, and not just for the wealthy, but for everyone. And so right now we have to do a couple things. We have to rethink the foundation budget, which was created 25 years ago. And right now, well-intentioned, but is not including many costs that communities face. We also need to remember, as I said before, that there are connections between all of these things. Many reasons that our school districts are having trouble is because their healthcare costs are going up and they don't have the additional money. So solving healthcare would help the funding for education. And in affordable housing, if you have better affordable housing, you improve child and maternal health that makes kids better prepared to school so that they succeed. This is one thing that I think I bring to these discussions, is a really deep understanding of the ecosystem that people live in and the dependence that people have on a variety of things. And I just want to conclude by saying, we, as Jay noted, we were the founders of the idea of public education. We didn't know how much it would cost. We didn't know how it would work. We didn't know how to organize it. But we knew that it was important. And we committed to it, and we built the systems. We need to rethink it again, recommit again. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is going to be, what are your plans as governor to improve the management of the MBTA? And where in your list of priorities does the public transportation stand? The order's going to go backwards. Bob, Jay, and then Sam.
Okay. I want to start by answering a different question. No, because we actually debated or had a forum yesterday out in Greenfield, and the question of the challenges facing women and girls never came up, and I'm worried it's not going to come up here. So I'm just going to say a couple things. I mentioned child and maternal health. We also need to support reproductive rights. I'm glad that the governor supported the concept of universal contraception once Donald Trump took that away. We have to fight sexual harassment. We have to fight domestic violence. We have to fight for pay equity. We have to fight for diversity at the top of our biggest companies and on their boards. And we have to put more women in office. And I say that as someone who took my funding, the leftover money I had from my last race, and gave most of it to the wonderful organization Emerge, which is training women for positions to run for office. So that would help with a lot of the questions that we're dealing with. So in addition, about the MBTA, first of all, we are seeing, well, you have to do it sometimes. You have to raise the question. The MBTA is part of a larger problem of privatization. The governor is relentlessly pursuing privatization on the grounds that it would save us money and putting long-term contracts in corporations, in one case, a foreign French company, to run our systems. Now, there's a problem with that. When you privatize, you have to give it to a company that has to make a profit. So they have to deliver the same service, build in a profit. How do they get that money? By suppressing wages. And that's what's happened. You either get rid of the union or you suppress the wages of the people who are there. And this is an attack on everything public. Public libraries, public health, all the things that we count on. Public parks, public schools. So this is, Charlie Baker smiles a lot, but this is an attack on the core elements of the United States. Are we a government and an economy that spreads resources that we can share, or is it something that says if you don't have the money, you don't get to do it? And that is the direction that this governor has been promoting under the guise of saving money, but it is really an attack on all of us.
So despite what Governor Baker says, ultimately this isn't a management issue. This is about investment. The T has been starved for revenue for decades. And the rest of our transportation infrastructure across the state as well, by the way. So as a result, we are 45th in the country when it comes to the condition of our transportation infrastructure, 47th when it comes to commute times. It is totally unacceptable, and if there's anything that is going to start to drag Massachusetts backwards, it is going to be the condition of our infrastructure. It is going to stall growth. So here's what I would do. One, be honest about the fact we need to invest more in our transportation system, not only to get it to the state of good repair that people should expect so they can rely on it to get to work on time, but also to make some of the transformational investments that we need to make to position us for growth going forward. I mentioned one of them before, high-speed rail to Springfield, but there are a number. Charlie Baker's approach to this has been, we don't need to invest more. All we need to do is manage better. And his version of that is jacking up fares on riders beyond what was planned, which just drives more people to the roads, the exact wrong direction. Cutting service to cut costs, particularly in underserved communities. Seti mentioned the Fairmont line as one example. And privatization, which Bob mentioned, which, along with all the other evils of it, it separates the people responsible for delivering the service to us from those who are the publicly elected officials accountable to us for delivering it. And you saw it in full force just on Friday when all the commuter rails broke down and had to be canceled and weren't on time, and the Baker administration pointed the finger at Keolis, the private operator of the commuter rail system. The governor is accountable for this. And the governor needs to have a sense of urgency and be honest with people about the fact we need to invest in our system. I've taken a pledge. I started on Thursday to actually ride the T for 5 days, and I invited other people to to let me know if they would allow me to do their commute with them. And so I started on Thursday. I did it Thursday and Friday. I'm going to do it the next 3 work days. And on my commute, I talked to a man named Renato, who lives in Dorchester and commutes to Cambridge. He told me the system is totally unreliable for him. He's a chef, and he is often late. He's often stuck on the red line where it will just stall in the summer, not during freezing periods or snowstorms, in the summer for 20 minutes. He's got a whole kitchen staff he relies on to be at work on time to do his job that all rely on the T to get there, and they all have problems getting there. This is a problem not only for Renato, but it is the biggest issue I've heard of people complain about all across the greater Boston area, and we need a governor who's going to actually do something about it.
We have all sat in gridlock traffic, right? We have all driven over broken down roads and bridges across this Commonwealth. And we now know, based on federal data, that our commuter rail system is the worst commuter rail system in the entire country. We're number 1. We're over New York and New Jersey, and they cite mechanical breakdowns and failures. Charlie Baker's answer to this is more privatization and no new revenue. This is simply backwards. We have got to not only invest in upgrading the MBTA, not only commuter rail, but we actually need to expand transportation in Massachusetts. I believe, when I think about transportation, I believe we should be using the term one Commonwealth. Why do I say that? Not only do we need to build east-west rail across the state, but we need to build South Coast Rail. We need to connect the north and south part of the MBTA, north-south rail link. We need to extend the Blue Line, and we need to build good, green, regional transit authorities that go to the last mile, that get to people where they need to go, where they need to work, where they need to drop off their kids. By the way, you want to talk about reducing the carbon footprint of Massachusetts, you build good, reliable transportation, that's one of the drivers of carbon going into the atmosphere. We can actually address climate change if we also build good, solid transportation systems in our state. I, like Jay, and I'm sure Bob, have ridden the MBTA multiple times. I rode the Red Line a few months ago with a young man that went to Suffolk, that was going to Suffolk University. He challenged me to ride from Walston to Park Street. I got on that train with him. He said he's missed final exams. He said he's been late to class. I talked to another gentleman who's an IT specialist. He said, I am late at least 3 or 4 times a week because of the Red Line. I'm going to lose my job because I can't afford to park at Park Street. Our budgets and our decisions need to be based on outcomes for people. This governor is not listening, and he is a Republican, folks. Same old Republican stuff. Surprise, surprise. Privatization, no new revenue is not the direction. Investment is what we need to do to address economic inequality and give our folks a shot here in Massachusetts.
The next question will be answered in the order of Jay Gonzalez, Seti Warren, and Bob Massey. Given the work being done at the federal level to weaken gun laws, what will you do to counter this and make sure Massachusetts remains a leader in gun violence prevention?
So this should be a big concern for all of us. We in Massachusetts are very fortunate. We have the toughest gun laws in the country, and they work. Our incidence of per capita death rates by gun violence are the lowest in the country, thanks to the fact that we have the strongest gun laws. If everybody else in the country would get this simple point and the federal government would actually act and follow Massachusetts' lead, we'd all be in a much better place. Unfortunately, we're not. And there is legislation pending in Congress that would basically make it legal for people who are permitted to carry concealed weapons in other states to be legally permitted to do so in Massachusetts, even though it is not consistent with our laws here. We need our congressional delegation, which thankfully they are fighting that. We need a governor who is jumping up and down and screaming at Congress and at the president, asking them not to do this and advocating for our interests here in Massachusetts. Fortunately, we've got an attorney general who is suing President Trump every 5 seconds over things like this. And she's been great on this issue. I support her approach in interpreting our laws against assault rifles, to ban copycat assault rifles also. We should all appreciate her leadership on that. Governor Baker is not as good as he needs to be on this issue, just like pretty much every other. There is legislation pending right here in Massachusetts which would allow silencers to be legal. Right now, they're illegal. And that would be very dangerous. We saw the shooting in Las Vegas, if you remember that. One of the reasons people started to understand what was happening and probably saved lives is they could hear the gunshots from, or would have saved more lives if they could hear the gunshots from the assault rifle that was being used in Las Vegas. It is really important that we keep silencers illegal here in Massachusetts from a safety perspective. Governor Baker has met with the head of a company that makes these silencers, and it was reported that he guaranteed that if the legislation hit his desk, he would sign it. Now, if you follow the money, this company and this person also gave a lot of money to the RGA, one of the many organizations that Governor Baker uses as a shell organization to funnel money and do political money laundering from huge wealthy donors who he then does favors for. And this is one of the examples we all need to stay on top of and make sure this legislation doesn't pass here in Massachusetts. And you can, while we're waiting for who's next, you can find my entire gun violence reduction policy on my website.
Everybody gets an extra second now. That's Seti Warren is next.
That was nice. Look, as someone that was in the military that carried an M16 around when I was in Iraq, these weapons have no place in our neighborhoods or our streets. I've been a proud member of Mayors Against Illegal Guns for several years. I actually organized mayors and town officials across the state to support our great Attorney General's effort to close the assault weapon loophole. She did great work on that. I also believe we need a governor that is not going to appoint the head of the Massachusetts NRA to fish and game wildlife, because that's what Governor Baker just did this year. We have to have a governor that is willing not only to keep the laws we have in place, not sign the silencer legislation, but work with other states and governors. We know a lot of these guns are coming in from outside of Massachusetts. So we have to have a governor that's going to work at the national level with other governors to prevent the flow of guns coming into our state, to put in place universal background checks, to eliminate assault weapons from our neighborhoods and from our streets, and to ensure we have a governor that is going to have the courage to stare down at the NRA and say no. So that's how I see it. I think we've done a great job in the state thus far to protect our residents from guns, but we're in danger with this administration and the proposals that are coming forth. So we have a lot of work to do if we're going to keep our state safe, and we need to have the right governor in place to do that.
So you all know how tight a grip the NRA has had on our national government. It's been an obscenity for so long, and it has only gotten worse under Donald Trump. So let me give you a couple of examples. Not only did they end the assault weapons ban, not only have they prevented the NIH and other parts of government from examining even the data about gun violence in order to ask whether there are things that we can do, but they do unbelievably, that Donald Trump did something I think is unbelievably offensive, which is that he invited the head of the NRA to the Oval Office on the anniversary of the Shady Hook massacre. Now, that gives you some sense of how desperately we must fight back. Now, I also want to go in a little more depth into what Maura Healey is trying to do. So, the gun sales, people selling guns in Massachusetts were using this assault weapon loophole. And what they would do is they'd take an assault weapon and they'd make some very minor change, cosmetic change or small functional change, and they say, see, we made a change. It's not really an assault weapon anymore. And 10,000 of those were sold in 2015 in Massachusetts. 10,000. And Maura Healey wants to close that loophole. And initially, Governor Baker agreed with her. And then the NRA wrote to him and said, you can't do this. And because I think Governor Baker has some plans beyond the governorship, he didn't want to annoy the NRA. And so he withdrew his support for Maura Healey's copycat proposal, which were reasonable. Now, what we can do, I mean, and just to go on, we face an epidemic of violence in some of our inner cities. That's linked partly to addiction and drugs and the opioid crisis. I mean, we have to attack this on many fronts. We could be doing the research that the federal government is denying. But the most important thing is that, and this is where I believe that each of us will demonstrate leadership and use that opportunity to speak out in a manner that, not just about this state, but about the country. But let's face it, Charlie Baker coddles Donald Trump. He goes out of his way to avoid saying anything offensive to Donald Trump. And that is something that we have to not say, oh, at least he's not as bad as Donald Trump, because he's a Republican supporting a Republican president. And that's why we need a Democratic governor to replace him.
We're going to circle back to the first question that I screwed up on. So we have 4 minutes, and Bob Massey, Jay said it, okay? The first question was, all of you have supported single-payer healthcare. The question is going to be, what steps will you personally take to make single-payer a reality in Massachusetts? And is it your goal to have it enacted during your first term?
Yes. The challenge that we face is that since 1948, we have committed to a system of employer-based health care that actually only covers about half the people in the United States, because people over 65 are already on single payer. It's called Medicare. And that's why I support the idea of expanding Medicare, as Senator Sanders has proposed and got 16 co-sponsors in the United States Senate. That would be the right solution, because we could gradually increase the membership and participation in Medicare. We can't actually do that in Massachusetts because Medicare is a federally funded program, but we can do it potentially by exploring opening up Medicaid, which is partially funded by us. But this is such a crisis. I just want to say, even in the last few weeks, I've heard from people. When I was in Western Mass, I met some folks, 2 women, a single mother, and another woman and they make barely $22,000 a year. And they do not know how to pay, not only for the premiums, but also for the deductibles and all the other expenses that accrue to them. So what we need to do is, first of all, we have to elevate this to the top level. Now, one of the things I've done, I haven't had a chance to talk much about my background, but I am a social justice activist for my whole life. I started as a minister. I got a doctorate from Harvard Business School, and I have worked on some of the deepest, toughest international problems around funding and corporate structure and corporate accountability through organizations like Ceres and Global Reporting Initiative and the Investor Network, all the things, these are things. But what we had to do in those cases was to bring people who fundamentally disagree, had different interests from around the world and different cultures and different institutions, and focus them not on what they disagreed about, but on what we could agree on. And we have 11 or 12 insurance companies that are going to have to face the reality that we're moving forward. So number one is bringing people together, pushing for it relentlessly, and that's something I believe I have the skills. I also want to say that this is deeply, deeply personal to me, because being born with hemophilia, which destroys your joints, I was in a wheelchair from the time I was 4. I got out of that wheelchair because my parents moved to France, and my mother's Swiss, wanted us to learn French, but when we got there, we discovered that their commitment to healthcare as a right would be extended to me as a foreign resident. And that meant that I was able to get the critically expensive and important medications that allowed me to get out of that wheelchair and those leg braces. It liberated me. And that's why single payer is so critical. We have to see it not as the light as an entitlement, but as a right, not as something that we want to get around to doing at some point, but something that is critical, as we've talked about, connected to almost every other component. In fact, I would make the case, as somebody who has worked with a lot of executives, that every executive of a company in Massachusetts should support this, because transferring the cost of healthcare for a company to the state would actually leave much more money. Even if we increased taxes on them, it would leave more money for them to do what they want. So this is something that other countries solved in 1948, and that we tried to solve again in the 1970s, and that we tried to solve again with Hillary Clinton in the 1990s, and that Obama tried to solve, and it's the national system's being gutted, and this is a place where Massachusetts needs to lead. But I believe I have not only the training and the experience, but I have the fire to make sure that this happens.
Access to good quality healthcare is a fundamental human right. Every single person should have access to the healthcare services they need to be as healthy as they can be, period. And right now, our current system does not result in that. There are lots of inequities in terms of access in our current system. The system is also way too complicated for people to navigate. We've all experienced it personally. It is way too expensive. It is not financially sustainable the way it is on the trajectory it's on. And the quality, honestly, even right here in Massachusetts, isn't as good as it should be. We're great if you've got a really sick kid who needs to go to Boston Children's. We're the best in the world. But our infant mortality rate, not as good as other countries. So we have a lot of room for improvement here, and we have to improve. We need a sense of urgency around this issue, too. We've got a governor who keeps putting Band-Aids on a system that has gaping wounds. We need to move to a single-payer system as the best means to getting to a simpler, cheaper, financially sustainable, better system that actually works better for people. And I believe it should be premised on Medicare, but Medicare actually isn't a single-payer system. I think we need to do better than Medicare. Most people on Medicare have supplemental insurance from private insurers because coverage isn't comprehensive under Medicare. So here's the thing. I'm the only candidate in this race that actually has experience in healthcare, in the healthcare industry. So in government, When I worked for Governor Patrick, I was chair of the board of the Health Connector when we successfully implemented Massachusetts health reform in Massachusetts. I also was the person on behalf of Governor Patrick that negotiated the major healthcare cost containment law in 2012 with the legislature and with members of the healthcare industry. My last job, I was CEO of a health insurance company that covered low-income people in the Medicaid program here in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire. And every additional second I spent in the healthcare industry, the more discouraged I got with how dysfunctional it is. I know better than anybody, and I know where all those dysfunctions are. And let me give you an example. I was very proud of what our health insurance company did in terms of our efforts at helping our members access the care they needed and coordinating care. We were a leader in addressing the opioid epidemic. I'm proud of all that. Most of what we did was facilitate useless, valueless transactions. We had a whole team of people that would go out and negotiate contracts with every doctor and hospital in the state, and all of which are different terms than the contracts that every doctor and hospital has with every other health insurance provider. We would then have whole teams of people who would input all those contracts into our systems to make sure we paid the bills right. We inevitably screwed some of that, so we have whole teams of people who would go out and fix up all the screw-ups. And every single health plan has all that, and every doctor and hospital has teams of people to deal with all those teams of people. It's ridiculous. It adds no value. In fact, it's counterproductive. And all the doctors, you talk to them these days, they are sick and tired of the administrative nightmare that exists and is a function of our single-payer system. We need to get rid of it. It is 20% of our economy. We need to be careful about how we do it. We could implement single-payer in a way that doesn't achieve those outcomes. We need to be thoughtful, and we need real leadership on this. I believe I am best positioned, based on my experience in the healthcare industry, and credibility as a former health insurance CEO saying we need to get rid of health insurance companies and move to a single-payer system to actually get this done. And I will get it done.
Look, here's how I see this. I've heard stories from people all around the Commonwealth. I've been to over 150 communities. People making choices between paying for a copay and going to the doctor or paying for the rent or mortgage. People making decisions between buying prescription drugs they need for themselves or their family members or putting food on the table. This is unacceptable and wrong in the state of Massachusetts. Now look, there's some good things about what's happening here in Massachusetts around healthcare. Around 98% of folks have some kind of health insurance. That's good. We have great healthcare innovations and MDs and doctors. The challenge is the expense. We are the second highest, most expensive state as far as healthcare. Now, this is where I differ between Charlie Baker and the folks down in Washington, Republicans there. Republicans down in Washington and Charlie Baker's answer is to make it more expensive for people to obtain healthcare in the state of Massachusetts. Rising in co-pays, lowering deductibles, all sorts of things that average everyday people get hurt on here in the state, and including proposing to remove 140,000 people off of Mass Health, which is that is exactly what Charlie Baker proposed just a few months ago. Instead of going in that direction, what we need to do is create a system that's accessible and affordable. We can put that in place here in our state. At this moment, we can no longer wait for the federal government, the folks down in D.C., to solve this issue around healthcare. This is going to be solved at the state level. States need to play a leadership level here. We can reduce costs by reducing administrative costs and drug costs, not by making it more expensive for people. I've been talking to people all around the country about this and learning. One of the folks I've been talking to and learning from is former Governor Pete Shumlin of Vermont, who tried to put single payer in place. I've learned and listened to him. I believe, as he believes, that Massachusetts can lead the way in the country around putting in place an affordable, accessible, single-payer system. Lastly, 4 principles I would put in place when I talk about single-payer. Number 1, we need to make sure that single-payer healthcare is affordable for people. Number 2, it needs to be accessible no matter where you live. Number 3, you need to have the right kind of coverage. Just because you have insurance doesn't mean that you, in fact, have the coverage to keep you healthy. And we need to make sure it's affordable for people. If we put these principles in place and we reduce costs by reducing administrative costs and drug costs, we can create a system here in Massachusetts that works and that's affordable for people. I understand this is very complicated. It is not going to happen by putting a key in and turning it, and overnight it's all going to happen. What it is going to take is real political leadership. Someone that is the governor that's going to be not just working within the legislature, but really engaging our residents here in the state of Massachusetts around the importance of this, and making sure that our residents hold the governor accountable and the legislature accountable from getting this done. I learned that as a mayor. I conducted 70 town halls in my first term as Mayor of Newton, and we got some very difficult policies passed, including a tax package that was passed in my last year as mayor. We need to do the same thing here in Massachusetts. That's my commitment in my first term as your governor. Thank you.
We thank you all for coming today and for our candidates who have spent a great deal of time with us substantively discussing the issues that were on all of your minds. I'm going to ask them to give their closing statements, and then Leo is going to follow up with a conclusion for the forum. So, as a guiding question, and this will be 4 minutes each, so each of the candidates will have 4 minutes to conclude. As a guiding question, and in the order of Jay Gonzalez, Steady Warren, and Bob Massey, you will have 4 minutes for this to use as your guiding question. When you leave the governor's office, what will you want for your legacy to have been?
To have made a meaningful difference in people's lives that actually affects their lives in a positive way, all across the state, and being remembered as a governor who actually stood up for every single person, which we don't have right now. That's what I'd like my legacy to be. I'm going to do what Bob did and ask a question that hasn't been asked to help go into the rest of my closing that I know is on everybody's mind. How are you going to beat Charlie Baker? He's so popular. He's tall. I'm going to ask a favor. Next time a Democrat says to you, you know what, I kind of like Charlie Baker, I think he's fine. Here's what I want you to ask them. I want you to ask them why. Ask them why. And when you do, when they answer, it's going to, I'll bet $1, it's going to be something like the answer that I always get, which isn't, he's really doing a great job making progress on our transportation system, or, you know, he's really, you know, made a lot of progress in making college more affordable. He's not even trying any of those areas. It's usually going to be an answer something like, he seems nice, and I'm really glad he isn't a crazy extremist like exists in other parts of the country. And then I'd like you to ask them this. When did the measure of whether our governor's doing a good job become that he's nice and isn't crazy? Right? We face a lot of big challenges. We talked about many of them today. Every single one of them, healthcare, education, you name it. He is not only not making progress on them, he literally is not even trying. There's no agenda to do so. And it's a very different thing when someone is asked, how do you feel about Charlie Baker? And the answer is, he's fine. And the polling shows nobody's passionate about Charlie Baker. He's fine. It's easy to be popular when we don't do anything, we never take a stand, right? Versus a choice, which is what elections are about. And the choice in this case is going to be between a governor who will have no record making any meaningful difference on any issue that affects people on a day-to-day basis and has been terrible about standing up for people, and someone who desperately wants to do so. And in my case, I would argue, has the best experience to actually deliver on that ambitious progressive agenda. When I worked for Governor Patrick in state government, I was not only managed the state budget and other stuff for him, I was often his point person for negotiating a lot of the big stuff we got through the legislature, with other key stakeholders. I know how the process works. I've worked successfully through it. I've actually gotten big things done in state government. And as your governor, you can count on that. Now, here's where I'm going to ask for your help. Because if people don't understand that choice, we won't win. If they do, we will. And let me say, these are two great gentlemen. If either one of them ends up becoming the nominee, I will work 100% for either one of them to get elected because they do a hell of a lot better job than Charlie Baker. But I'm asking you to support me. For the reasons I've described, I think I'm best positioned to deliver on that ambitious agenda. I want your help. I want you to put a bumper sticker on your car. I want you to knock on doors. I want you to call your friends, send them our website, let them know about this campaign, why it's important to them, why it's important to Massachusetts. And with your help, I am 100% confident we will win this election. Thank you very much.
Thank you for convening this really important discussion. Look, I know where I came from. I got into this race because of the issue of economic inequality. My parents grew up poor, discriminated against, and they instilled in me the responsibility that whatever I do in my life, I'm doing everything I can to provide the same opportunity they provided me. And many other people that stood on the lines to desegregate, put civil rights in place. Generations of people in this state around the country put their lives on the line to do. We are at a moment right now in our state where we need to step up and make that same commitment and investment to give the next generation of people in this state an opportunity to be successful and ensure their kids can do better than they did. You want to know what I want? What I want people to say? If I actually became your governor, that he actually met that commitment. And he inspired others to meet that commitment. Now look, I'm going to start where I left off in the beginning of this conversation. We got a governor that embraces, and he wants you to embrace, the status quo and low expectations in this state. He wants you to believe that we can't do anything about the opioid crisis. 2014, Deval Patrick declared a state of emergency. First state in the country to do so are on opioids. Since then, 6,000 people have died. 250,000 people are living with opioid addiction right now. 5 people a day are dying of opioid addiction. You got a governor that's on a panel appointed by President Trump, run by Kellyanne Conway. Okay? And this president declared a state of emergency but didn't put any resources behind it. Baker's doing the same thing here in Massachusetts. That's why I started a series on town halls and conversations about opioids so we can make the investment, not just in education, not just discouraging people from taking drugs, but in treatment. Lifelong, community-based. There are not enough beds to detox. When people come out, there's nothing there. Charlie Baker wants you to embrace the worst commuter rail system in the country. Right? He wants you to embrace the low expectations of the fact that somehow it's going to take us 20 years. This is what he said. It's going to take us 20 years to fix the T. My response to him is, it's going to take you 20 years. Get out of the way and let me do it. And make the investments that matter. He wants you to embrace this idea that we need to promote fossil fuels. You got a group of people down in Weymouth, they've been sitting in front of his office for 70 weeks. He won't take a meeting with Andrea Honore from Weymouth, who's trying to block the compressor station down there, so that we can create more gas lines to pollute the atmosphere. We need to invest in solar and renewable energy technologies. He wants you to embrace these ideas. I say no, we're not going to embrace it. We should not embrace the status quo. We should not embrace low expectations. You've got great candidates sitting up here right now, and here's my ask of you. Sign up with someone right now. I want you to support me, but if you don't support me, sign up with one of these gentlemen right now, because at the end of the day, next November, we're all going to be together. And we've got to beat this governor, so we put the state in the right direction, and we make the generational choice we know we need to make for our state. Thank you very much.
There are 2 things that I would like to be my legacy. The first is to undo the damage that's being done through the economic injustice that's being perpetuated. I want to take that upside down economy and I want to turn it back around so that people at the bottom and in the middle are the ones who benefit from our economy, not at the top. And we do that through everything that we've talked about, making improvements in education, transportation, clean energy, and so forth. But I also want to reignite the spirit of Massachusetts, which has guided us and that we have embraced since the beginning. And that's the spirit of imagination, of creativity, of boldness, of moving forward with the greatest experiment ever, which is a government of the people, by the people, for the people, making decisions that last long into the future. Now, I tend to think about our past and I tend to think about our future. I see us, we're not here that long. And we inherit a legacy, and then we have to create a legacy. And when I was in Yarmouth, I asked, what do you think a governor's role should be? What's that job? And we heard a lot of things, management and so forth, those are important. But really, one woman said, the role of the governor is to look into the future and see the problems that are coming towards us and to help us to prepare. And I think we are not doing that right now. I mean, we tell ourselves, Massachusetts is the leader, we do this, we do that. No, I mean, take transportation or energy. In European countries, we have countries that are already getting 50% of their electricity from offshore wind. We're not even started on that. We have transportation around the world that puts us to shame. The Saudi Arabian just put in a train that goes 300 miles in 2 hours. You could get to Albany in 90 minutes, to Albany with stops. The Chinese have put in 10,000 miles of high-speed rail. We have 0. Now, Charlie, and I think we have a real theme here. He talks about one thing, and then you have to look at what he does. And he's also performing a kind of negative Jedi mind trick. And that is, I am so popular, and I have so much money, you might as well just give up. Don't even bother. Focus on some other race. This is not the race you are looking for. But we have to break free of that, because we are part of a long struggle that goes back to George Washington being concerned about the money interests, and Abraham Lincoln being concerned about corporate power, and Teddy Roosevelt fighting the trust, and Franklin Roosevelt, who when he was opposed said, I welcome their hatred, because he knew he had to fight for us. And even Dwight Eisenhower, who said, we have to stop the military-industrial complex. Now, finally, I just want to say, because of Indivisible, because of our revolution, because of the Democratic Party, there is a blue tide coming in. Elizabeth Warren won by 600,000 more votes than Charlie Baker got. So if we invite those voters to come back, if we boost turnout, we can win this race. And I want to tell you, if a Democrat can win in Alabama, a Democrat can win in Massachusetts.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the candidates. Now we know who you are. To the activists out there, let's show them who we are. Let's make a difference. Good night, everybody.